By sunrise, all 5 of them should have been gone. The storm had already decided that much. Snow swept across the northern Rockies in long, ghostly waves, erasing roads, burying fences, and swallowing every trace of warmth beneath a blanket of white. The wind moved through the mountains with a low mournful cry, rattling frozen pine branches and driving temperatures down to nearly 0 degrees. It was the kind of winter night locals respected and travelers feared, a night when even the strongest creatures searched desperately for shelter. Hidden beneath a collapsed cedar thicket near an abandoned logging trail, a German shepherd mother lay curled around 4 tiny puppies. Her sable coat was thick with frost. Snow had gathered across her back and shoulders until she seemed almost part of the landscape itself. Yet she did not move away. She did not search for safety. She remained exactly where she was, wrapped tightly around her pups, shielding them from the cold with the last warmth her body could give. The puppies were only weeks old. Small. Fragile. Their tiny breaths drifted into the freezing air in faint clouds that vanished almost instantly. One stirred weakly against its mother's chest. Another pressed closer to a sibling, seeking comfort it barely understood. The mother lowered her head and touched her nose gently against them. Her amber eyes remained open despite exhaustion. Watching. Waiting. Protecting. The snowfall intensified. Thick flakes swirled through the darkness, settling across the family until their shapes became harder to distinguish. The forest around them stood silent except for the endless voice of the wind. No headlights crossed the old trail. No cabins stood nearby. No one knew they were there. Hours passed. The temperature continued to fall. The mother's breathing grew slower. Each breath seemed harder to find than the last. Yet whenever one of the puppies whimpered, her ears twitched. Whenever one shifted beneath her, she adjusted her body to cover them more completely. She had already made her choice. If warmth remained, it belonged to them. Somewhere beyond the ridge, nearly 12 miles away, a truck moved carefully through the storm. Its headlights cut narrow tunnels through the snow while chains rattled softly against icy pavement. Behind the wheel sat Nathan Brooks, a former Navy SEAL with weathered hands wrapped around the steering wheel. He had spent most of the day attending a memorial service for a teammate he once called brother. The ceremony had ended hours ago, but the silence that followed had stayed with him. The truck's heater hummed softly. A faded silver dog tag hung from the rearview mirror, swaying with each turn. Nathan barely noticed it anymore. Some grief becomes part of the furniture of life. Outside, the storm worsened. Snow drifted across the road in thick sheets. Nathan leaned forward, eyes fixed on the narrow path ahead. Then something appeared at the edge of his headlights. A shape. Dark against the endless white. Small enough to miss. Still enough to mistake for a fallen branch. Nathan's foot eased onto the brake. The truck slowed. For a moment, he considered driving on. But something about the shape felt wrong. Or maybe it felt important. He stared through the windshield as snow whipped across the glass. Then, deep within the drifting white, he thought he saw 2 faint amber eyes looking back at him. And everything changed. Nathan stared through the windshield as the storm pressed against the truck like a living thing. For several seconds he did not move. The heater hummed softly. Snow tapped against the glass. Those amber eyes remained fixed on him from the darkness beyond the headlights. Then they blinked. Slowly. Tiredly. Human instinct might have called it curiosity. But Nathan knew better. It was a plea. He shifted the truck into park and reached for the heavy winter coat lying on the passenger seat. The moment he opened the door, the cold hit him like a wall. Wind rushed across the road carrying needles of snow that stung his face and vanished into the collar of his jacket. The old logging trail disappeared beneath drifts nearly knee-deep. Nathan pulled a flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped into the storm. The beam cut through swirling white. At first all he could see was snow. Then the shape emerged. A German shepherd. Female. Larger than he expected. Her sable coat was almost completely covered by frost. She lay motionless except for the faint rise and fall of her chest. Yet even in her condition, she lifted her head slightly when he approached. Not to defend herself. Not to flee. Just enough to look toward something hidden beneath her. Nathan crouched carefully. The dog watched him with exhausted amber eyes. There was no growl. No fear. Only determination. He followed her gaze and gently brushed away a layer of snow near her side. His breath caught. For tiny puppies were tucked beneath her body. Their small forms trembled weakly against one another. One released a faint cry barely audible above the wind. Another moved just enough for Nathan to know it was still alive. For a moment the world seemed to fall silent. Nathan had seen courage before. He had seen it in teammates who carried each other through impossible conditions. He had seen it in people who refused to quit when every reason said they should. But something about this mother struck him differently. She had remained here through hours of freezing darkness with no promise of rescue. No certainty of survival. Only instinct. Only love. Nathan swallowed hard. The silver dog tag hanging beneath his coat shifted against his chest. Memories surfaced uninvited. Hospital hallways. Quiet rooms. Goodbyes that arrived too soon. He pushed them away and focused on the task in front of him. "Stay with me, girl," he said softly. His voice nearly vanished into the storm. The shepherd's ears twitched. That was enough. Nathan removed his coat and carefully wrapped the puppies inside it one by one. The warmth would not last long, but it was something. Then he slid his arms beneath the mother. She was lighter than she should have been. Fragile beneath the thick fur. Yet as he lifted her, she turned her head immediately toward the bundle containing her puppies. Counting them. Checking them. Still being their mother. Nathan carried them toward the truck through the deep snow. The wind howled around him. The puppies whimpered softly from inside the coat. The shepherd remained quiet, her eyes never leaving them. Minutes later the heater blasted warm air through the cab as Nathan laid the family carefully across the back seat. He climbed behind the wheel and looked into the mirror. The mother had not taken her eyes off the puppies once. Then something unexpected happened. One of the smallest pups stretched forward and pressed against her muzzle. The shepherd closed her eyes. Just for a second. And Nathan suddenly realized he was not racing home through the storm anymore. He was racing against time itself. The truck climbed steadily through the storm as Nathan guided it along the narrow mountain road toward his cabin. Snow drifted across the headlights in endless silver ribbons, while the engine growled softly against the winter darkness. Every few seconds he glanced into the rearview mirror. The puppies remained bundled inside his coat, pressed together for warmth. The mother lay beside them, her breathing shallow but steady. She had not looked away from her litter once. Nearly 40 minutes later, a faint glow appeared through the trees. Nathan's cabin stood alone at the edge of a frozen meadow, surrounded by towering pines dusted white beneath the storm. Warm amber light spilled from the windows onto the snow. To most people it was just a small cabin. To Nathan it was a place where silence lived. He parked beside the porch and moved quickly. The wind tugged at his jacket as he carried the puppies inside first. Warm air rushed over them the moment the door opened. The scent of cedar logs and wood smoke filled the room. A cast iron stove crackled gently in the corner. The cabin had never felt especially alive before. Tonight it felt different. Nathan spread thick blankets across a rug near the stove and carefully placed the puppies down. Tiny whimpers filled the room. One stretched weakly. Another burrowed closer to its siblings. Then he returned outside for the mother. Snow had gathered across her fur again during the short drive. He lifted her carefully and carried her inside. The moment her paws touched the floor, she tried to rise. Her legs trembled beneath her. Nathan immediately understood why. She was trying to reach her puppies. "Easy, girl," he whispered. "They are right here." The shepherd turned her head toward the blanket. Her ears twitched at the sound of their tiny cries. Only then did she settle down beside them. Nathan disappeared into the kitchen and returned with bowls of warm water, clean towels, and supplies left over from years of mountain living. He knelt beside the family and gently dried the frost from the puppies' coats. Their bodies felt frighteningly cold. Yet little by little they began to stir. Small movements. Tiny breaths. Signs of life. The mother watched every motion. Her amber eyes followed his hands closely, not with suspicion but with concern. Nathan noticed something remarkable. No matter how exhausted she became, she remained focused on her litter. Every instinct pointed toward them. Every ounce of strength she still possessed belonged to them. Hours slipped by. The storm continued outside, rattling windows and shaking pine branches against the roof. Inside, the cabin glowed with firelight. Nathan sat on the floor near the stove, feeding extra wood into the flames. The silver dog tag around his neck slipped free from beneath his sweater. It caught the firelight briefly before settling against his chest. His eyes lingered on it longer than usual. The room grew quiet. Then one of the smallest puppies released a weak cough. Nathan immediately looked over. The tiny pup had rolled onto its side and was barely moving. The mother nudged it gently with her nose. Once. Twice. 3 times. The puppy did not respond. Nathan's stomach tightened. The warmth of the cabin suddenly felt very far away. And for the first time that night, he realized that bringing them here might not be enough. The puppy remained still beside its brothers and sisters while the fire crackled softly across the room. Nathan moved closer and placed 2 fingers gently against the tiny chest. For a moment he felt nothing. The shepherd lifted her head immediately. Her tired amber eyes locked onto the small pup. Every muscle in her body seemed focused on that fragile bundle of fur. Nathan swallowed hard. The storm outside continued to roar against the cabin walls, but inside the silence felt heavier. He reached for a clean towel and wrapped the puppy carefully. The little body was cold. Far colder than the others. He carried it closer to the stove and sat cross-legged on the floor. Warm orange light flickered across the room, painting shadows along the log walls. Nathan rubbed the puppy gently through the towel, trying to restore warmth. Minutes passed. Nothing changed. The mother watched every second. She struggled to her feet once, stumbled, then tried again. Despite her exhaustion, she slowly crossed the floor toward him. Nathan did not stop her. When she finally reached his side, she lowered herself beside the towel and rested her head near the puppy. Her nose touched the tiny bundle softly. Once. Then again. The gesture carried a quiet desperation Nathan understood all too well. Years ago, he had sat beside another hospital bed wishing determination alone could change an outcome. Sometimes love felt powerful enough to move mountains. Sometimes it felt helpless. The silver dog tag hanging from his neck shifted as he leaned forward. His gaze drifted briefly toward a framed photograph resting on a nearby shelf. A smiling woman stood beside him beneath a summer sky. Her hand rested over her stomach. Both of them laughing at something beyond the frame. Nathan quickly looked away. Some memories still carried too much weight. He focused on the puppy again. "Stay with us, little one," he whispered. The words escaped before he realized he had spoken them aloud. The room remained quiet except for the crackling fire and the distant howl of winter wind. Then something happened. A tiny movement. So small Nathan almost missed it. The puppy's paw twitched beneath the towel. Nathan froze. The shepherd lifted her head instantly. Another movement followed. Then a faint breath. Weak. Fragile. But there. Nathan exhaled slowly, a breath he felt he had been holding for hours. The mother released a soft sound deep in her throat, almost like relief. She nudged the puppy again. This time the tiny head shifted toward her warmth. Nathan smiled for the first time that night. It was brief, but real. He carefully returned the puppy to its siblings. The moment it settled beside them, the other pups instinctively pressed closer. The mother curled herself around. All four again, forming a protective circle. For the next hour Nathan sat beside the family, feeding logs into the stove and watching their breathing. The warmth in the room slowly deepened. The puppies appeared stronger. Even the mother's eyes seemed a little brighter. Yet just after midnight, as the fire settled into glowing embers, Nathan noticed something that made his stomach tighten all over again. The mother had stopped eating, stopped drinking, and her breathing had begun to slow. The cabin clock crept past midnight while the storm continued its lonely song beyond the windows. Snow brushed against the glass in soft waves. The fire had settled into a bed of glowing embers that painted the room with gentle orange light. Nathan sat beside the family and watched the mother carefully. Something was changing. Her breathing had become slower. Her eyes opened only halfway now. Several times he placed fresh water near her, but she barely acknowledged it. The puppies remained pressed against her side, searching for warmth and comfort. She responded to them every time. A slight movement of her head. A faint touch of her nose. But each gesture seemed to require more effort than the one before. Nathan felt a familiar weight settle into his chest. The kind of feeling that arrives before bad news. He stood and searched through a storage cabinet until he found an old veterinary handbook left behind years earlier by a neighbor who had moved away. He flipped through pages beneath the lamplight, scanning every line he could find. Exhaustion. Severe exposure. Dehydration. Recovery could take time. Recovery was not guaranteed. Nathan closed the book and rubbed his eyes. The words offered little comfort. He returned to the rug. The mother looked at him as he approached. Those amber eyes held no fear. No panic. Only quiet concern for the puppies sleeping against her. Nathan understood that look. It was the same look he had seen in people who worried more about others than themselves. Outside, the wind struck the cabin roof with a long mournful whistle. Inside, the smallest puppy suddenly released a weak cry. Then another. Nathan immediately leaned forward. The tiny pup from earlier struggled to crawl closer to its mother. Its movements were clumsy and slow. The mother lifted her head as if she wanted to respond, but this time she seemed unable to move far. Nathan gently guided the puppy toward her. The little one pressed against her neck and settled there. For a brief moment the mother closed her eyes. Peace washed across her expression. The room grew quiet again. Minutes stretched into nearly an hour. Nathan remained awake, unwilling to leave their side. The silver dog tag resting against his chest felt unusually heavy tonight. His thoughts drifted toward memories he rarely allowed himself to revisit. Long hospital corridors. Silent drives home. Empty rooms waiting on the other side of loss. He had spent years building walls around those memories. Yet sitting here beside this family, those walls felt thinner than ever. Then the fire popped sharply. Nathan looked up. One of the puppies had climbed awkwardly onto its mother's shoulder. Another followed. Soon all four were gathered around her, nestled together in a small circle of trust. The sight pulled something deep inside him. Something he had buried beneath years of loneliness. A faint smile touched his face before fading away. Then he noticed the mother's breathing again. Slower. Shallower. Almost difficult to see. Nathan moved closer and rested a hand gently against her side. The warmth was still there. But it felt fragile now. Like a candle flickering against a strong wind. He looked toward the dark windows where the storm still raged across the mountains. Morning was hours away. And for the first time since bringing them home, Nathan found himself wondering whether the coming sunrise would arrive soon enough. At 3:17 in the morning, Nathan was still sitting on the floor beside the stove. The fire had burned low again, casting long shadows across the cabin walls. Outside, the storm had finally begun to weaken. The fierce wind that had ruled the mountains all night now sounded distant, almost tired. Inside, however, the silence felt heavier than ever. Nathan kept his hand near the mother's side, watching each breath as though his attention alone could keep it coming. The puppies slept in a small bundle against her chest. For nearly 20 minutes nothing changed. Then the smallest puppy suddenly lifted its head. The movement was so unexpected that Nathan leaned forward immediately. The tiny pup released a soft cry into the quiet room. Not weak this time. Stronger. Clearer. The sound seemed to echo through the cabin. One of the other puppies stirred. Then another. Within seconds all four had begun shifting and crawling over one another, their tiny tails twitching as they searched for warmth. Nathan smiled faintly. It was the most life he had seen from them all night. Then he heard something else. A long slow breath. He turned toward the mother. Her ears moved. Barely. But they moved. Nathan froze. The shepherd's nose twitched once. Then again. Her eyes remained closed, yet something had changed. A minute passed. Then another. Suddenly her eyelids fluttered. The amber eyes that had nearly disappeared beneath exhaustion opened halfway. Nathan could hardly believe it. The mother looked first at her puppies. Not at the room. Not at him. Only at them. The smallest pup immediately crawled forward and pressed against her neck. She answered with a gentle nudge of her nose. It was a tiny gesture. Yet it felt bigger than the storm outside. Nathan let out a breath he did not realize he had been holding. The room seemed warmer. Brighter. The mother slowly lifted her head from the blanket. Her movements were weak but deliberate. One by one she checked each puppy, touching them gently as if counting them. Making sure they were all still there. Making sure her family had survived the night. Nathan looked toward the window. Beyond the glass, the clouds had begun to break apart. Moonlight spilled across the snowfields and painted the frozen meadow in silver. For the first time in hours, hope felt real. The shepherd turned her gaze toward Nathan. Their eyes met across the firelight. No words existed for what passed between them. Gratitude perhaps. Trust perhaps. Or maybe two weary souls simply recognizing survival in one another. Nathan reached forward and carefully placed a bowl of warm water beside her. This time she noticed it. After a moment she leaned forward and drank. Only a little. But enough. Nathan laughed quietly under his breath. The sound startled him. It had been a long time since laughter had visited this cabin. The puppies continued squirming around their mother while the fire crackled softly nearby. Outside, winter still covered the mountains. Inside, something remarkable had happened. Life had chosen to stay. And as the first faint hint of dawn appeared beyond the distant ridge, Nathan realized this night had given him something he thought he had lost years ago. Not certainty. Not answers. Just a reason to believe that miracles sometimes arrive one small breath at a time. Nathan slept for less than an hour. When sunlight finally pushed through the frost-covered windows, he was already awake, sitting beside the stove with a mug of untouched coffee cooling in his hands. The storm had passed. Beyond the cabin, fresh snow stretched across the valley like a white ocean beneath a pale blue sky. Everything looked peaceful. Yet the greatest change had happened inside. The puppies were moving constantly now. Tiny paws stumbled across blankets. Small noses explored every corner within reach. Soft squeaks filled the room where silence had once ruled. The mother watched them carefully from her place beside the fire. She still looked tired, but strength had begun returning to her eyes. Nathan noticed it immediately. The alertness. The spark. The quiet determination that had carried her through the storm. He filled another bowl with warm water and placed it beside her. This time she drank without hesitation. Then she surprised him. Slowly, carefully, she stood and crossed the room. Her legs wobbled at first, but she remained upright. Nathan could not help smiling. That simple walk felt like a victory greater than words could describe. The morning passed peacefully. Sunlight drifted across the wooden floor while the fire crackled gently nearby. For the first time in years, the cabin felt alive. Not just occupied. Alive. Nathan found himself talking aloud more often. Small comments. Simple observations. Things he normally would have kept to himself. The puppies, however, seemed convinced he existed solely for their entertainment. The smallest one repeatedly attempted to climb over his boot before tumbling backward into the blanket pile. Another discovered the loose lace on his hiking boot and declared war against it. Even the mother seemed calmer whenever Nathan entered the room. Around noon he stepped into the storage closet searching for extra blankets. While reaching toward an upper shelf, an old cardboard box shifted and fell to the floor. Its contents scattered across the room. Photographs. Letters. Memories. Nathan froze. He recognized the box immediately. It had belonged to Emily. For years he had avoided opening it. For years he had convinced himself it was easier that way. The room suddenly felt smaller. Quieter. He knelt and picked up a photograph from the floor. Emily stood beside a mountain lake, laughing into the wind. Sunlight caught her hair. Happiness lived in her eyes. Nathan stared at the image for a long moment. The familiar ache returned. Not sharp anymore. Just deep. Like an old scar that never completely disappears. Then something warm touched his hand. He looked down. The mother had crossed the room and settled beside him. She rested her head gently against his knee. No hesitation. No fear. Just presence. Nathan swallowed hard. The photograph trembled slightly in his fingers. For a long time neither moved. The puppies continued playing nearby. The fire whispered softly in the background. Sunlight filled the room. Somehow the sadness felt different today. Less like a wound. More like a memory. Nathan reached down and stroked the shepherd's neck. "Thank you, girl," he said quietly. She lifted her eyes toward him. In that moment he realized something he had not been ready to admit before. He had believed he rescued this family from the storm. But sitting there in the warmth of the cabin, surrounded by life, laughter, and second chances, Nathan began to wonder if they had rescued him first. The weeks that followed carried a quiet kind of healing. Winter still held the mountains in its grasp, but each day the sun lingered a little longer above the ridges. Snow began slipping from pine branches in sparkling curtains. Small patches of earth appeared along the edge of the meadow. Life was returning. Inside the cabin, it already had. The puppies seemed to grow overnight. What had once been tiny bundles wrapped in blankets were now energetic explorers determined to investigate every corner of Nathan's home. One discovered the joy of chasing its own tail. Another developed a habit of hiding beneath the kitchen table and refusing to come out unless bribed with attention. The smallest pup, the one who had fought hardest through that first terrible night, followed Nathan everywhere. If he walked to the woodpile, the puppy followed. If he checked the mailbox at the end of the driveway, the puppy followed. If he sat quietly on the porch watching the sunrise, the puppy curled beside his boots as though guarding him from loneliness itself. The mother had recovered beautifully. Her strength returned day by day. The dull exhaustion had vanished from her eyes, replaced by calm confidence. Nathan eventually gave her a name. Hope. The name felt right the moment he said it. She responded immediately, lifting her ears and looking directly at him. From then on, the name stayed. Hope moved through the cabin with quiet grace, always aware of where her puppies were, always attentive, always watching. Yet Nathan noticed something else. More and more often, she watched him too. One afternoon he sat outside repairing a section of fence damaged during the storm. The air smelled of pine sap and melting snow. Birds had begun returning to the valley. Their songs drifted through the trees like music carried by the wind. Nathan worked slowly, enjoying the simple rhythm of the task. Hope rested nearby beneath the sunlight while the puppies tumbled through the grass for the first time. Their excitement seemed limitless. Every stick was a treasure. Every snowbank was an adventure. Every butterfly deserved investigation. Nathan found himself laughing more than he had in years. The sound came naturally now. No effort. No guilt. Just joy. Later that evening, as golden light filled the valley, Nathan stood at the edge of the meadow and watched the puppies race across the snow. Hope stood beside him. The silver dog tag around his neck caught the sunlight briefly before disappearing beneath his shirt again. For a moment his thoughts drifted toward Emily. The memory no longer arrived with the same crushing weight. Instead it felt warm. Gentle. Like sunlight passing through an old photograph. Nathan smiled softly. He imagined she would have loved this scene. The puppies. The mountains. The laughter. Hope stepped closer and rested against his side. Nathan placed a hand on her shoulder and looked toward the horizon where the sky glowed with shades of gold and amber. The storm that had brought them together already felt distant. Yet its gift remained. Because somewhere between saving a family and finding a purpose, Nathan had discovered something he thought winter had taken forever. A future worth walking toward. Spring arrived quietly in the Rockies. The last traces of snow retreated into the shadows beneath the pines, and the valley awakened beneath clear blue skies and warming sunlight. Wildflowers appeared across the meadow in small bursts of color. Streams once trapped beneath ice sang their way through the mountains again. The world felt renewed. The puppies were no longer puppies in the way Nathan remembered. They had grown into strong young dogs with endless energy and personalities that filled every corner of the cabin. One remained fearless and curious, another thoughtful and observant. One loved chasing birds it could never catch, while another preferred stretching out in the sun for hours as though life itself was a luxury worth savoring. Hope watched over them all with the same devotion she had shown on that winter night. Yet now there was peace in her eyes. She no longer looked like a mother fighting against the storm. She looked like a mother who had finally reached safe ground. One evening, nearly 4 months after the rescue, Nathan climbed a ridge overlooking the valley. The air carried the scent of pine, fresh grass, and distant rain. Golden sunlight washed across the mountains, turning every peak into a silhouette of amber and gold. Hope walked beside him while the young dogs raced ahead through the meadow below. Nathan stopped near a weathered wooden fence and rested his arms across the top rail. For a long moment he simply stood there. Watching. Listening. Breathing. The valley stretched endlessly before him. Behind him stood the cabin that no longer felt empty. Beside him stood a dog who had become family. Below him ran 4 young lives that had once fit beneath a single blanket near a fading fire. The silver dog tag rested against his chest beneath his shirt. Nathan touched it gently. Not with sadness. Not anymore. Just gratitude. The wind moved softly through the grass. Somewhere overhead a hawk drifted across the sky. Hope stepped closer and sat beside him. Their shadows stretched long across the hillside. Nathan smiled. It was the kind of smile that came from deep within, the kind that appears when a person finally stops carrying the weight of yesterday alone. He thought about that night often. The storm. The frozen trail. The amber eyes appearing in the darkness. At the time it had seemed like a simple rescue. One family saved from the cold. But life rarely reveals its meaning in the moment it happens. Sometimes understanding arrives much later. Standing there beneath the evening sky, Nathan finally understood. The storm had not only brought him a mother and her puppies. It had brought him back to himself. The mountains grew quieter as the sun slipped beyond the horizon. One by one the young dogs returned, gathering around Hope and Nathan as though completing a circle that had begun months earlier. No words were needed. No grand celebration. Just the gentle sounds of life continuing exactly as it should. And as the first stars appeared above the Rockies, Nathan looked across the valley and felt something he had not felt in years. Not sorrow. Not loneliness. Grace. Because some stories do not end with victory. They end with healing. And sometimes the smallest miracle is not surviving the storm. It is discovering that after winter finally passes, the heart can bloom again.